Michael over here again for Shoreline English 102. Today we're going to be talking about logical fallacies. And the reason that we're talking about logical fallacies I think will become very clear here shortly. So I found this meme online, so and there are a whole series of them. They're pretty concise, really. So here's one that I just chose at random. I kind of liked how concise this one was. Failed argument to ignorance. So this is one of the many types of logical fallacies. And underneath it says, just because it hasn't been proven false doesn't mean it is true. That is that particular logical fallacy. Today we're going to look at 5 in particular that are the logical fallacies that I feel are most common in student writing and really quite common in arguments. But there are hundreds of these things. So to narrow it down, we'll just look at the 5. So, how do logical arguments really work? I think to understand a fallacy, we have to understand the basics first. So, a basic logical argument is something like if A, then B. So, if B, then C. So, usually we provide a claim and then show a chain of events that lead to some sort of conclusion. In other words, if the premise, the first part is true, then the conclusion is true. Right? So that premise is the thing that we build our argument on. Okay? And you'll see this in your research, right, as you go forward. So an example of a logical argument: if it is raining, then we won't go outside to play. It is raining outside, therefore we won't go outside to play. Or things that are combustible catch fire. Paper is combustible, therefore if I hold a match to paper it will catch fire. So you can see how those things work, and we'll keep it simple with those examples for right now, but I think you can kind of see a logical progression, right? So logical fallacy is flawed thinking. So it's when something went wrong in the chain of events to prove an argument. Sometimes these flaws are committed intentionally, but more often than not students do these fallacies unintentionally. So it's much like the plagiarism video, where there's an intentional plagiarism where you do it on purpose, but more often than not students are doing these things unintentionally and they're doing them on accident. So as I mentioned already, there are whole lists of fallacies, hundreds of them, but we're only focusing on the ones that are most troublesome for writers. Right? So why are we learning about them? Kind of same thing again. They're mistakes made often in essays. Our goal is to communicate clearly. Our ideas should be logically supported. I want you to be able to identify these fallacies both in your own work and in the work of others, right? When you think about when we talked about evaluating resources, this is something that should come up. You know, maybe pause for a moment and say, wait a minute, does this make sense? Is this a logical conclusion, right? So basic logical fallacies. So I've got 2 here for you to look at, and I just think about them for a second. So in blue, right, all old men are often bald. Joe is bald, therefore Joe is an old man. Well, if we think about that for a second, does it necessarily follow that just because Joe is bald, he is an old man? If we pause and think about it, we have to ask ourselves, are there occasions in which Joe could be bald and simply not an old man? Well, sure there are. There are any number of reasons why even a young person might be bald. So we've got a flaw in the argument there, right? The second one, Michael's English 102, is awesome. Therefore, all English classes are awesome. Okay, so we've got another one there. Clearly my class is awesome, but not all classes are. So you can see how that works. So just think about those 2, right? Again, if we pause for a moment, we can see that there's a shift there. There's something that is missing. So here are the 5 that we're going to focus on, and you may be familiar with these. These may sound familiar to you. I'm going to give you guys a nice solid definition, and I'll give you the source where you can go to look at more. In class, we'll look at more examples. So pretty much spending the week looking at logical fallacies. They're that important, right? So strawman, circular logic, hasty generalization, red herring, and slippery slope. Those are the 5 that I sort of identified as the most common. Others probably just as common, but these are the ones I really want you to be aware of. In particular, circular logic, which we'll get to. So strawman. So when I was looking for a nice definition for you all, and I've used definitions from a variety of places in previous classes, but I stumbled across logical, I think it's actually logicallyfallacious.com. So that website is pretty phenomenal. Any logical fallacy you can name, you can find there with a definition and an explanation, some examples. So straw man fallacy quote, substitutes, quote, a person's actual position or argument with a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of the position of the argument. So think about it. If I'm arguing with somebody, presenting an argument, and I change your words and change your position as a result of that, I've committed a straw man fallacy. It comes from this idea that I've sort of presented something that's easy to knock down, right? It's something that's easy to attack. Oops. Circular reasoning. This one I want to spend a little bit more time on because it is actually one that I feel happens all the time, and not just in student writing, but we'll see it everywhere. And once you sort of get the gist of what it is, I think you'll see it more and more, right? So again, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to check that site. I know the slide says logical fallacious, but I think it's logicallyfallacious.com. Circular reasoning is also known as assuming the initial point, assuming the answer, chicken and the egg argument, circulus in probando, circular reasoning, and a vicious circle. So think about it. All of these things have in common is the fact that they're a cycle. And a circle is not the best way to create an article, right? It is, quote, any form of argument where the conclusion is assumed in one of the premises. Many people use the phrase begging the question incorrectly when they use it to mean prompts one to ask the question. So circular reasoning is really one where it's not sound because your conclusion, one of your premises is sort of locked up in that conclusion. And again, we'll look at some good examples of this tomorrow. My goal today is really just to give you a quick overview of all of these things so that you can kind of begin to understand them and think about them. And then, of course, you can go and do a little bit of extra looking if you would like. Hasty generalization, again, we see a lot. Just as it sounds, this fallacy occurs when we make an assumption based on a small group or example. So think about my example earlier with Michael's English 102 class is awesome, therefore all English classes are awesome. That's really a hasty generalization. We've got too small of a sample set. So again, according to logically fallacious, so there I got it right, quote, drawing a conclusion based on a small sample size rather than looking at statistics that are much more in line with the typical or average situation. So stereotypes work like this in some ways. Anytime that I'm choosing one example to define an entire group or entire series of situations. It's a dangerous one, I guess I'm going to add to fall into in research especially, because it means that you haven't conducted full research if you're falling into this hasty generalization trap. Okay, red herring. So red herring is, quote, attempting to redirect the argument to another issue to which the person doing the redirecting can better respond. Well, it is similar to the avoiding the issue fallacy. The red herring is a deliberate diversion of attention with the intention of trying to abandon the original argument. So bear that in mind. We've all seen this. We all probably done this at some point in time in some argument, where what we've done is we've tried to derail the argument, turn the argument in a different direction. You can kind of see and think about how this is maybe similar to a straw man argument, right? In this case, though, it really is moving away from the initial argument to something that's easier to deal with. Okay, the last one here that we're going to look at is slippery slope, and we're going to look at a great example of this in class if I can get the technology to cooperate. So slippery slope is when a relatively insignificant first event is suggested to lead to a more significant event, which leads to a more significant event, and so on. Many events are usually present in this fallacy, but only two are required, usually connected by the next thing you know. This particular fallacy is one that is dangerous for us as writers to fall into in a research or persuasive essay, because it's not necessarily true that things are going to escalate as rapidly as we believe they are. Now, slippery slope is kind of useful in a persuasive essay, given you can pull it off and your reader is not going to identify it. I will say that when I read articles or essays that use slippery slope, I automatically sort of question the author's intent. Are they intentionally doing a slippery slope? Because if they are intentionally doing it, I think that they're trying to trick me. And if they're unintentionally doing it, I think that they are not fully thought out their argument. Right? Okay, so those are our 5 basic logical fallacies that you should think about and you should be able to identify, and that's really the important thing. There will be a quiz on these. It will be through Canvas, so it'll be multiple choice, but you will need to identify these situations, okay? So why are they difficult? Why are they so difficult to identify? They're really difficult to find in our own writing because it's hard to see where our thinking is flawed. To us, it makes sense that we're going from A to C and maybe missing B, right? But for a reader, oftentimes, they need that bridge. And we'll look at that a little bit later this quarter when we talk a little bit more about the Toolman model. And some of you may be familiar with it. Definitely something that I cover in English 101 when I'm talking about persuasive essays and argumentative essays and so on. So these are also difficult to find in other people's writing because they are not always straightforward, and sometimes multiple fallacies exist in a singular argument. So it's not to say that something is only going to be slippery slope or only going to be strawman or only going to be hasty generalization. You might have 2 of those things working at the same time, which makes it even trickier. Especially in a longer, more complex project, you might see multiple versions of these, right? So in summary, there are hundreds of different logical fallacies. We're focusing on the 5 that I feel I see most often in student writing. You should be able to identify these 5 fallacies in order to avoid them. And for additional clarification, you should visit www.logicallyfallacious.com. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Now, a couple reminders for this week. So obviously we have class on Tuesday and Thursday. So we will go over these logical fallacies more on our in-class days, and we'll discuss them and we'll look at some examples so you can get a better handle on these things. I would encourage you to start to try and identify these. Part of me says that I should just make you all bring in an example of a fallacy. I think that's a little bit too tricky at the beginning here. So we're going to wait, and I'm going to show you some examples. Your research project is due Tuesday, so if you were watching this video on time Monday, then this isn't a surprise to you, and you will have already turned in that paper copy. Again, it needs to be the revised version of the research proposal, so you've taken into account my comments, and a revision to the annotated bibliography. Now, I'm going to be honest, if you followed all the parameters, you're probably not going to have a lot of work to do, in particular with the annotated bibliography. So if you followed all of the steps and looked at the example, you're probably not going to have to do a ton. But please do defer to whatever comments I made on your draft. Definitely, all the citations should be in correct order, alphabetically by author's last name, italicized where necessary, so on and so forth. You should correct grammar, correct punctuation in your annotated bibliography. If you didn't address all the sort of parts of that annotation, which is evaluating the source, giving me a little bit of a paraphrase of it, and then assessing how it's going to help your research question, you should go ahead and do that and add to it. For the research proposal, hopefully you've been working on it and you've had some more time to sort of focus on it and improve it. So once that is due, we're going to go ahead and in class on Tuesday, we'll begin to talk about the next project. You're going to have more time and you're going to have fewer things to turn in for that. So you won't be turning in an annotated bibliography. So we're going to kind of work it a little bit differently. But I wanted to do the annotated bibliography for two reasons. I wanted you to be able to have the experience of writing a correct citation and evaluating sources, right? I think everybody did a good job at finding and sort of, at least to some extent, evaluating those sources. But the annotations really need to be, you thinking in your own words and evaluating that source. Other than that, please continue to read Frankenstein. We'll discuss that a little bit in class. And I think that's it for now. If you have other questions, go ahead and email me. I know I just remembered one other thing. The response to article posts. So this is very important. So last thing, and then we'll conclude this video. The first group is posting today, Monday, July 10th. You will have the week to respond to that. So throughout the week, by Friday, you should have responded to one of the questions and one of your classmates' responses just as you did to any of the other posts, including the ones that I gave. So the 2 TED Talks and the 2 articles that we read, exactly the same. It's just instead of me writing the questions and choosing it, your classmates have, okay? Other questions, concerns, comments, recipes, jokes, etc., go ahead and email me. Otherwise, since you're already on YouTube, you might as well go look at some cute cat videos. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow.